Countless writers steep their real-life experiences in fiction, but you could call Susan Reinhardt an evangel-novelist. Her new novel, her second, is a polemic against our system for treating those with drug addiction. Reinhardt titled it The Beautiful Misfits, and she comes to the story through her own experience as a mother whose adult son seesawed between addiction and treatment.
I don't think the treatment centers and the way we treat addiction in this country now is working at all. And it just was my passion to create a rehab center that might be used as a model. It is a little bit utopic, but it could be done.
I'm Matt Piken. My guest today, Susan Reinhardt, is a former reporter with the Asheville Citizen-Times who evolved into a nationally syndicated humor columnist. She now lives in Burnsville. We'll talk about her days as a journalist and as a humor writer, her experiences of the addiction to treatment pipeline, and her ideal alternative as laid out in her novel. The Overlook is giving away 2 pairs of tickets to see every Magnetic Theater production for the rest of 2023. Just sign up for the Overlook's free newsletter. Go to podavl.com/newsletter and plug in your name and email address. Anyone registered by the end of April is eligible. That's podavl.com, podavl.com/newsletter. And who knows, I might see you at the Magnetic. Susan Reinhardt grew up in the town of LaGrange, Georgia, on the Alabama border. I began our conversation by asking about her start as a writer.
I started writing when this boy, his name was Mark Huckstep, and I was probably 13 and he was 18. He was a lifeguard at the pool, and he was 10, and I was just madly in love with him, and it was, of course, unrequited. And so I started writing the worst poetry you've ever read, teen angst poetry. And I would go up in my parents', they had an attic over the garage, and I still have that journal. It's just filled with little stories and poems. And I knew that I wanted to be a writer from that time forward, but I took a different path.
The path toward journalism, you mean, or?
That's the path I wanted to take, and my dad said, journalists don't make any money. He was really smart back then. He's still smart.
But nobody who goes into writing is thinking about money. You don't. You just know what you want to do.
Exactly. It's a passion. It's a calling. But my dad said with my temperament, I might not get a husband. So he said, you better go to nursing school. And I did. I went to University of Georgia and for 2 years studied nursing and worked at a hospital in between college summers and semesters as a nurse technician, meaning I gave a lot of enemas and sponge baths. So finally I just said, I can't do this, and switched.
Is that when you found journalism, or were you thinking of writing poetry and fiction?
No poetry. I wanted to write for newspapers and magazines. So that's what I studied, that path at the University of Georgia. They have a really good journalism school, and I got in and never went back to nursing, just kept writing.
What kinds of things did you want to write about and cover?
I liked humor, and I loved human interest. I find people's stories absolutely fascinating. I can talk to anybody about everything, and I'm a kook magnet. So all the kooks they gravitate towards me like lint on a black outfit. And because of my attraction to kooks, I got some fascinating stories, and I just wanted to write about real life.
Did you have a path that was pretty up? Did it have an upward trajectory in terms of where you worked? Did you get some good jobs in newspapers and magazines?
It did. It had an up-down at first. So my internship was with the Spartanburg Herald-Journal, and that was the first column. I ended up a columnist syndicated, but my first column was as an intern at the Spartanburg paper. They had me cover an air show. So there was a pilot, his last name really was Bird, and he took me up in a stunt plane. I didn't know that I had to have waivers. I was maybe 20 years old. We went up in a stunt plane. He did the aerial flips, and there was no roof or whatever you call it, no real fuselage over the plane, and it was pretty scary, but I wrote my first column about it and almost got fired from my internship for not having, they could have been liable if I fell out of the plane. And then I kept writing for them, and my first job out of college was the Myrtle Beach Sun News.
You said you had a syndicated column. You know, there are a lot of columnists who never get syndicated. How many papers were you syndicated in?
The Gannett newspaper chain.
So that's pretty great.
Yes.
And you were young at the time when you were a syndicated columnist.
No, that's the trajectory we were talking about. So after the Myrtle Beach paper, I quit and moved to the Virgin Islands and lived in a tent.
Why? Why the Virgin Islands?
Another heartbreak.
Okay. Were you on St. John, St. Thomas?
Yes, St. John.
Okay.
That is my happy place, and we go a couple of times a year. So I lived there for a couple of months. I lived in a sort of a hippie commune place called the Maho Eco Resort. They've since recently torn it down. It was yurts, and I just lived there for maybe 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
And then came home, didn't have a job in journalism, so I started teaching that Jane Fonda high-impact aerobics and worked at a gym, and I thought, this is awful. Shin splints, thong leotards. A friend of mine said, why don't we go visit Asheville? And I had never been here, and I came up here, saw the newspaper, went to the mall and got a really ugly dress and applied, put that dress on and had my clips, and I applied for a job at the Asheville Citizen-Times. They had an afternoon paper called the Times and a morning paper called the Citizen back then, 1987. And so I had to wait for somebody to die to get a job. That's really bad. So this guy, I hate it for him. He died, and I got a job as sort of a beat cop reporter.
Did you love it?
I loved being back in journalism. I loved Asheville. And eventually, I got moved up to columnist. But I was 35 years old. But I had this fantastic editor. This is before Gannett took the paper over. It was multimedia, great place to work. I had an editor. He had gone to the University of Georgia. He's the one that promoted me to columnist, and he would let me do just about anything. And that was the best job I've ever had until Gannett came in. So I stuck with it until, after massive years of layoffs, it was finally my turn. And there were about 12 of us let go that very day. This was in 2013.
Was fiction an itch that was happening all the while you were in journalism? And what finally brought it out of you?
Desperation. So it was an itch. I wrote my first fiction piece. It was a play in high school, and it was not very good looking back. But when I was struggling in my marriage, and he's a good man, I decided the only way I would be able to afford a house and a divorce would be to write a book. So when my son was born, I started writing a book. It was called Heartbone. And it was okay. I got some interest from agents, but that book didn't get published. So I wrote a second novel and got a great literary agent in New York City. He shopped the book around to publishers. We didn't get an offer on that book, so he told me to write humor. He said, write humorous essays like David Sedaris. So I wrote a book of humorous essays and got a 3-book deal.
Let's not just gloss over that. A lot of people think they're funny. A lot of people want to write that kind of stuff. It's a lot more difficult to actually put that out there. You wrote a book of humorous essays that had not been published previously. As columns, they had not been published.
Kernels, maybe. The germ of the idea could have been in a column, but a column is what? 500, 700 words,
right.
And these essays were 6-8 pages long.
So you would not have had the impetus on your own to think of yourself as a humor essayist up until your agent's suggestion to follow down that path.
I knew my columns were funny. Humor's subjective, but
yes.
The majority of people thought they were funny. There's some who thought they sucked. So he and I worked together, and all I had to do is so different from fiction. I had to write a proposal and 3 essays to get a book deal. And then if they liked the 3 essays, then, I wrote maybe 10 or 12 more. So
What were you interested in writing about?
crazy stuff. The book was called Not Tonight, Honey, Wait Till I'm a Size 6.
I saw that title
Right.
in your portfolio. Now, were you drawing on your life or observation, or were some of these fictionalized, or was it a blend of both, fact and
A lot was
fiction?
drawn upon my life back to the kook magnet syndrome, and there were embellishments to make it funnier, but there was a lot of truth in each of the stories. Like, one was about this stripper that didn't show up for my friend's bachelorette party, so we got a guy at the bar drunk and paid him $20 to be the stripper. They were slice of crazy life stories.
Did you find that your time as a columnist with the Citizen Times, did it prep you to draw out these longer, deeper threads as a humorist?
Yes, and I am very grateful for that learned skill as a journalist, even employed with Gannett. I continued to grow my craft, and I would get off work and then do my own stuff, fiction or essays.
Then you got published. This agent found you a deal.
He did. He got me a Kensington, which is one of the bigger publishers in New York, and they signed me up for 2 more books. So I got a house, a divorce, and a breast reduction.
Was being a humor essayist enough for you, or not? Did you still feel like there are things inside you wanted to get out that this format wasn't allowing you to do?
The format was restrictive in that the stories started, had a middle and ending, and they were short. And I wanted to use my imagination like a painter when they paint something and just create a long work of fiction.
Talk about what you wanted to fictionalize. What was your first outing that way?
The long piece I wrote was the novel that my agent, there were 2 novels. One is still in a drawer. It's a young adult novel set in Myrtle Beach. And then the one my agent couldn't sell ended up being Chimes from a Cracked Southern Belle, my debut title.
He couldn't sell it
In New York to the big guns.
Why did a lot of people will have that kind of rejection, say maybe I need to go back to the drawing board with a new piece. You didn't.
I didn't, because he referred me to an even bigger agent. Her name's Holly Root, and she's Taylor Jenkins Reid's agent who does Daisy Jones and the Six. So I had the Daisy Jones and the Six. It's a series now on Amazon Prime, and Taylor Jenkins Reid is a best-selling author, and so Holly Root is her agent. She was my agent, and she loved the book, and we edited it together, and she sent it out, and it was 2008 during the big recession, and we got very close, but nothing. So I said, you know what? I'm still going to publish it. And that's when a lot of writers quit, Matt, but I went with a local publisher here in town.
Oh, who was it?
Grateful Steps. They were wonderful, and then there were some issues, so I republished it myself. I got a new cover and did it through Amazon. It's my first and only self-published book.
And so did it do well on Amazon?
It really did well. And instead of getting, 10%, $1 a book, with the Amazon, you get about 60 or 70%.
What did turning to fiction allow you to do with your writing in terms of craft and expression that you weren't able to do through your essays?
With the essays, it's expected that there's a big element of truth, and unless you're writing fiction essays, but I was writing humorous essays. With a novel, it was just big. It's like, instead of an 8x10 piece of paper, I had a huge canvas and could throw words everywhere and just could craft characters. I could just make up characters. It was a great creative outlet, and a lot of my characters are based on either perceptions or people study or even real people that I know.
They say to never buy a used car without really looking under the hood. Jennifer Thomas says the same goes for real estate. Jennifer is a licensed geologist in Asheville who thrives on digging up the dirt. If you're investing in commercial property, call Jennifer first. She'll conduct Phase 1 environmental assessments, investigate the ground for contamination, and oversee any necessary cleanup. For details on what Jennifer brings to the table and to the land, go to gentechllc.com. That's GENNTECLLC.com. Let's talk about the beautiful misfits. It's a more serious matter, and I imagine it stems to some degree from real experiences that you've had, right?
It does. So with the first novel, Chimes from a Cracked Southern Belle, what I did was I took a serious topic and didn't inject it with flippant humor, but created characters and situations where, to release a pressure valve of the seriousness, you would have lighthearted, humorous moments. And I think I did the same with The Beautiful Misfits. It's really about the opioid epidemic and a mother with a preppy millennial son who refuses to get treatment, and she's a journalist, same as I was. I'll tell you the parts that are based on the true parts. But she's a broadcast journalist for a big television station in Atlanta. She's an anchor. And one night on air, she's had so much pressures from her son and her marriage that she just loses her mind, really, and has a massive breakdown on air for 84 seconds.
And that happens right at the beginning of the novel.
Right at the beginning. So then she's jobless, no stations will hire her, and she ends up in Asheville, North Carolina, from Georgia, selling makeup at a mall for a high-end luxury cosmetics line. And when I lost my job at the Citizen-Times, I went to work for Lancome. So all the makeup counter scenes, which do lend a lot of humor to the serious subject matter, are certainly authentic.
So you, once you were laid off, you went to work behind the counter. You did this.
I did.
You did. And do you have a son who fits the description?
Not with opioids, but my son struggled with alcohol and benzos. He was afraid of opioids because so many of his friends were using them and would fall out. They would go unconscious. They would OD. And he got to the point where he was carrying Narcan, which everybody should carry. That's my soapbox. And they should also carry fentanyl test strips, because that's what's killing more people, as you know, Matt, is you might be just this college kid or whoever, and you want to get a Xanax or something to relax, and you go get it, and that your first hit is your last breath.
Why were you inspired to see this as a foundation for fiction?
Because I don't think the treatment centers and the way we treat addiction in this country now is working at all. And it just was my passion to create a rehab center that might be used as a model. It is a little bit utopic, but it could be done.
How do you know these treatment centers aren't working?
Because I spent 5 years of research. My son was in a treatment center a couple of times, and AA and NA is great, and it works for a lot of people. It also does not work for the majority of people.
What isn't working? What do you think it is about those models that you said isn't working for most people that should or could be different?
It's an old model, and it has saved millions of lives, and that's great. But in today's era, today's times, a lot of the dogma, the AA 12 steps, a lot is punitive. The moral inventory, the admitting your faults. And when a person with addiction gets to that step, the fourth step, where they have to take a fearless and searching moral inventory, that's when they relapse. Treatment centers, in my view, and I'm not a psychiatrist, but I'm a member of a group of about 300,000 moms who have children with addictions, and you need other modalities. You need harm reduction, because the relapse rate is a given.
One of the things I noticed in your book is there are passages that seem like you use these moments to basically proselytize for that, in a sense.
I do, yes.
Yeah. And I'm wondering what the art was for you in knowing how and when to do that in a way that doesn't seem
Preachy?
or didactic, yes. And that, yes, just overtly preachy. Because, I noticed there are some moments where there are just, it's clear that's what you're doing. And I'm wondering.
I did it through the TED Talk.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So how did you come across thinking of that as the vehicle for how you would do this and how you set up that in the novel?
This part about the rehab, the resort rehab from the vintage campers, that was introduced at the beginning, but in an outlandish way. Like the main character sees that there's this vintage camper resort and rehab that's working, and it's volunteer basis. And so as the novel builds and progresses, I'd say the last third, you really get a tour of that rehab resort. But like going back to the TED Talk, more than the addiction, it's the environment you're in, that you live in. If you don't have hope, if you don't have goals, if you're not trained in different skills, and you go to rehab and you come home sober to the very same miserable conditions that you were in, well, there's no incentive.
And this is what you wanted to get across through the TED Talk in your novel.
It is.
Right.
Let's expand opportunities while people are in treatment. Let's just not get them sober, punish them, make them search inside for things that they're not quite ready to face. And in the rehab that I created, artists from schools would come, massage therapists from the tech schools. They were exposed to organic farming and marketing because the addicts ran the resort, and the resort was for sober people. And so it was a money-making, the whole rehab made money from the resort. And then the addicts would learn marketing and how to run that resort.
That kind of resort would cost a ton of money. That kind of rehab wouldn't be available to every.
No, it wouldn't, but the land had been given and was not in use, and it had a beautiful river. And
You're talking about in your book.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Have you had feedback from anybody? Yeah, I know the novel's still out in public, but I'm just wondering, is this something that you want people to look at and take from your novel and try to employ in real life?
I know that it's huge, and I know that it's expensive, but with volunteers coming from tech schools and art schools, even a traditional rehab could at least open the doors to more holistic approaches and teach other ways to get sober, a more cafeteria-style approach instead of do this with a rigid sort of modality.
Your novel also includes a search for the anchorwoman is looking for her son, right? Finley. Is that also a metaphor for your own search for your son? If not literally searching for him, but metaphorically.
Yes, it is. He and I had a very up and down relationship for about 10 years. And when he stopped the alcohol and his thing was kava and kratom, which that's a whole other thing of a legal substance from Asia that is really killing people, and it's super addictive. You've seen the kava bars, the kratom.
I don't even know what kratom is.
You don't want to know.
Yeah,
but anyway, that's a new thing going, and that was mainly his issue, was the alcohol, the kava, the kratom. But yes, our relationship was very uneven and oftentimes estranged. And when he got sober, I took him last year to Yellowstone, and it changed both our lives.
Is that your first time you've done that as adults?
Yes, and it's not going to be the last.
How old is he?
He is 30.
Okay, so not too far different from Finley in your book.
No, Finley's 23.
Okay, yeah, okay. So now you said this book was finished 3 years ago. So you've obviously been working on a lot of other things. And so even though you're talking about it now because it's new to the public, what has changed or evolved for you in your writing?
Oh, that's a great question, because after I wrote this book, I did NaNo, National November Writing Month. And that is a way not to procrastinate, because I have to win NaNo. So I get a really crappy first draft during Nano, and I'm doing a rom-com, just completely no serious topics. It's just humor.
Is this a rom-com in novel form?
Yes, and it's called Rebound for Rent. It's with publishers and agents now.
Are you now on to your next writing?
Yeah, I've almost finished my first romantic suspense, which is psychological domestic thriller.
Why are you bouncing
genres?
Yes.
Boredom, ADHD, I don't know.
Does your writing style have to change? I would think that would be really difficult because it's hard enough for writers to embody different character voices. This is my main criticism with a lot of fiction, is that one person sounds like another person, sounds like another person. So there's that challenge. And then to go from genre to genre, I would think your voice inherently would need to be in a different place with each genre. Isn't that so?
You have to tap into a different mindset and almost a different personality. The rom-com is mostly my personality. The Beautiful Misfits is just a mom, any mom with struggling with those things. But you say different genres, and that's true. They are a little bit different, but I'm still in the women's book club fiction genre. That's the big umbrella.
Now, you live in Burnsville. When did you leave Asheville to go move to Burnsville?
So I married this man, Donnie Laws. He's a wonderful man. I call him my country bumpkin lawyer. He's a lawyer in Burnsville, and we got married in 2009, but we didn't live together because he had a late-in-life child. I had a late-in-life child, and they didn't want to switch school districts. So we had a commuter marriage until a few years ago.
It must have been weird to be married and not live together for so long.
I don't know how we did it. Yeah. I think that's why I've been married so long, because we were living separately.
Yeah.
So when I moved in with him, I immediately bought one of those vintage campers that I wrote about in the novel, so that if I'm PO'd, I can go out there and...
I want to thank novelist Susan Reinhardt for being my guest today. Today's conversation happened inside the BB Theater in downtown Asheville, which owners Susan and Giles Collard have been so gracious enough to open to me to record my interviews. Our theme music for The Overlook, Maker's Song, comes courtesy of the Asheville band The Resonant Rogues. The Overlook is a production of Podcast Asheville. Don't forget, we're giving away 2 pairs of tickets to the rest of the Magnetic Theater's productions for 2023. To be eligible, just sign up for our weekly newsletter at podavl.com. Also, please vote for The Overlook as Best Podcast and for me as your favorite radio host in Mountain Express's Best of WNC survey. I'm Matt Peiken, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Overlook.